October 14th, 2018, 6:42 p.m. A glass-walled conference room in Lower Manhattan. The rain hasn't stopped all day. It streaks down the windows in thin, uneven lines, blurring the city into something abstract and distant. Inside, fluorescent lights hum softly overhead. A long oak table divides the room with quiet authority. Daniel Mercer sits at the far end. Navy suit, white shirt, no tie, hands folded loosely in front of him. Across the table, a senior partner, Margaret Ellison, adjusts her glasses and glances down at a printed report. "I just don't see enough initiative here," she says calmly. "It feels passive." The word lingers. Passive. The others avoid eye contact. Someone clears their throat. A laptop lid snaps shut. Outside, a siren wails faintly and disappears. Daniel doesn't move. He knows this isn't accurate. He led the restructuring. He absorbed the fallout. He stayed until midnight 3 weeks straight while others went home. He drafted the proposal Margaret is now summarizing as insufficient. His pulse rises anyway, a subtle tightening beneath the sternum. Not anger, not even frustration. Something older. The reflex to correct. You can almost feel it building in him, that familiar internal script forming with surgical precision. Clarify the timeline. List the contributions. Remind her of the context. Restore the narrative. Because if you don't, the room will solidify around this version of you. Passive. Margaret looks up. "Daniel, anything you'd like to add?" And this is where it usually happens. The shift in posture. The calm but slightly sharpened tone. The performance of reasonable defense. Carl Jung believed that individuation requires withdrawing projections, including the subtle, relentless attempt to manage how others perceive us. Most people never notice how often they do it. It feels like survival. It feels responsible. But Daniel does something different. He inhales. Then exhales. "No," he says, "I think it's clear." That's it. A small sentence, almost weightless. Margaret nods once and continues. The meeting moves forward, budgets, timelines, deadlines. But something has already happened. Inside him, a rearrangement. Because when you don't explain yourself, the discomfort doesn't disappear, it expands. Daniel feels it spreading, like stepping into cold water and deciding not to thrash. "They think I'm passive." The thought hovers. He doesn't chase it, doesn't polish it, doesn't dismantle it. He just lets it exist. And that is new. At 7:18 p.m. the meeting ends. Chairs scrape softly against the floor, papers gather into neat stacks. Margaret offers a polite nod on her way out. "We'll revisit this next quarter." Daniel walks into the hallway alone. The building smells faintly of carpet cleaner and rain-damp coats. His reflection follows him along the darkened glass panels. Passive. The word tries again. Normally, he would replay the meeting on the walk to the subway, rehearsing better responses, sharper phrases, the perfect measured correction he should have delivered. Instead, he does something radical. Nothing. He presses the elevator button, waits, watches the numbers descend. There's a tension in his chest, but beneath it, something else. A strange, almost unsettling stillness. From a Jungian perspective, the persona, the social mask, constantly negotiates its image. It wants coherence, it wants admiration, it wants protection from distortion. And Daniel has just refused to negotiate. The elevator doors slide open with a muted chime. Inside, mirrored walls multiply his image. He stands in the center, hands in his coat pockets, watching himself as the doors close. Who are you if you let them misunderstand you? The question isn't dramatic, it doesn't echo. It settles. On the subway platform, the train roars in with metallic force, wind whipping through the tunnel. He steps inside, gripping a cold steel pole as the doors shut. His phone vibrates. A message from Ethan, a colleague who sat 2 seats away during the meeting. "Tough room tonight, you handled it well." Daniel stares at the screen. "Handled it well." He types a response, deletes it, types again, deletes. Finally, "all good." He locks the phone. Because he realizes something uncomfortable. Even now, there's an urge to explain, to Ethan this time, to subtly correct the narrative through implication, to make sure at least someone understands that he wasn't passive, he was strategic. But he doesn't. He watches the tunnel lights flicker past the windows instead. Darkness, light, darkness, light. The first time you allow yourself to be misunderstood without defense, it feels almost irresponsible, like you've abandoned your own witness stand. But beneath that anxiety is something else. Space. Daniel leans back slightly as the train rocks. He notices that the room's judgment is no longer chasing him the way it used to. It's there, but it's not gripping. Because when you stop explaining yourself, you stop tightening around your image. And when you stop tightening, something loosens. He doesn't yet know what that means. But tonight, for the first time, he senses that the hierarchy inside him, the one that places reputation above internal solidity, has shifted slightly. Almost imperceptibly. And shifts like that don't announce themselves. They unfold quietly. Sometimes over months. Sometimes in a single withheld sentence. Daniel steps off the train into the cold night air. The city feels sharper somehow, less hostile, less demanding. He walks home without replaying the meeting once. And that, more than anything Margaret said, is what unsettles him. Because if he no longer feels compelled to correct the world's version of him, what is he beginning to trust instead? The apartment is quiet when Daniel unlocks the door. October 14, 2018, 8:03 p.m. Upper West Side. The hallway light flickers once before stabilizing. He steps inside, closes the door gently behind him, and stands there for a moment, coat still on, briefcase still in hand. The silence feels different tonight. Usually this is where the replay begins, the mind reconstructing scenes with obsessive precision, tone analysis, micro-expressions, strategic revisions. He sets the briefcase down. No replay. Just the low hum of the refrigerator, the distant echo of traffic below, the faint ticking of the kitchen clock. He removes his coat slowly, as if testing whether the urge will return once his body relaxes. It doesn't. Instead, something else surfaces. A discomfort deeper than embarrassment. If you don't correct the narrative, it continues without you. That's the part no one admits. When you explain yourself, you are not just defending truth, you are negotiating control. You are subtly asking the room to adjust its image of you, to restore symmetry. Tonight, Daniel surrendered that control. And now the world is slightly asymmetrical. He walks to the kitchen sink and runs cold water over his hands. The sensation anchors him, clear, immediate. Carl Jung believed that much of human behavior is an attempt to manage projection, both what we cast onto others and what we absorb from them. Most people never question this exchange. It feels natural to clarify, to refine, to curate. But withdrawing from it, that creates silence. Daniel dries his hands and looks at his reflection in the dark window. Passive. The word doesn't sting as sharply now. He studies his own face, searching for evidence. Is there passivity there, hesitation, fear? Or was there something else in that room, something Margaret needed to see? The thought is uncomfortable. Because once you stop explaining yourself, you are forced to consider a harder question. Why do you need them to understand you in the first place? He moves into the living room. A single lamp casts warm light across the bookshelf, titles on leadership, behavioral economics, architecture, orderly, controlled. His phone buzzes again. Another colleague this time. Don't worry about Margaret, she misreads people. Daniel reads it twice. Misreads people. There it is, the invitation. An easy alliance, a shared dismissal, a subtle restoration of identity. All he has to do is agree. He imagines he's typing, yeah, she tends to. That sentence would repair the imbalance. It would protect his self-image through quiet triangulation. But something inside him resists. Because he senses that, even the mildest correction through social bonding, is still explaining. Still adjusting the mirror. He locks the phone without responding. The silence expands again. You can almost feel the psychological air pressure change. This is the withdrawal. Jungian psychology points toward not dramatic isolation, but a gradual refusal to let identity depend on external alignment. Daniel sinks into the couch. There's a subtle anxiety rising now. But it's different from before. It isn't about reputation, it's about exposure. If he doesn't defend himself, what remains? For years, he built competence carefully, earned respect incrementally, shaped perception through consistency, reliability, articulation. And now he has allowed an alternate version of himself to circulate unchecked. Why? The answer isn't noble. It wasn't strategy. It was fatigue. A quiet exhaustion from constantly maintaining the architecture of how he is seen. He closes his eyes. There's a memory surfacing not from work but from years earlier. College, age 19, a seminar room much smaller than the one today, a professor dismissing his argument as underdeveloped. Back then, he had leaned forward immediately, defended every premise, cited every source, won the room back through precision. He remembers the rush of relief when classmates nodded. Relief. Not truth. Not growth. Relief. And now, nearly 2 decades later, he wonders how many times he has chased that same relief under different disguises. A car horn blares outside, the sound startles him slightly. He opens his eyes. The room feels larger than before. When you stop explaining yourself, the energy that once went outward begins folding inward. It doesn't vanish, it accumulates. And accumulation changes weight distribution. Daniel stands and walks to the bookshelf. His fingers brush the spine of a worn psychology text he hasn't opened in years. He pulls it out. Inside, underlined passages from a time when he was searching for language to understand himself. He flips through pages slowly. Individuation. Projection. Persona. Words that once felt theoretical now feel uncomfortably practical. Because individuation isn't about becoming unique. It's about becoming independent from unconscious dependency on perception. He sits back down, the book resting loosely in his lap. The anxiety shifts again. It's less sharp now, more diffuse. Almost like grief. Because if he no longer needs to explain himself, he also no longer gets the comfort of being corrected. There's a strange loneliness in that. The phone buzzes a third time. Margaret. His breath pauses for half a second. He answers. Daniel. Her voice is even, composed. I've been thinking about the meeting, I may have been too quick with that word. Passive. He says nothing. She continues, I value your work, I just need more visibility from you in the room. There it is. An opening, a repair. He could accept it, clarify his intention, restore symmetry fully. Instead, he hears himself respond calmly, I understand. And he does. But he doesn't add anything. No defense, no explanation. Just space. Margaret pauses briefly, perhaps expecting more. Well, she says, good night. The line clicks off. Daniel lowers the phone slowly. Something settles. Not triumph, not vindication. Stability. Because this time he didn't correct the misperception, and he didn't cling to the correction either. He simply allowed both to exist. And in doing so, something subtle locks into place inside him. A new center of gravity. He walks back to the window. The rain has stopped. The glass reflects him clearly now, without distortion. He studies his own image again. It looks the same. But it feels different. Because when you stop explaining yourself, you begin discovering whether you can tolerate standing alone inside your own version of reality. And tonight, for the first time, Daniel realizes he can. But he doesn't yet know what that ability will cost him. October 22, 2018, 9:11 a.m. Same building, same glass walls. The air feels thinner this morning. Daniel stands near the end of the conference table again, a legal pad in front of him, pen resting diagonally across the page. Outside, the sky is colorless, that pale New York gray that flattens everything into silhouette. Margaret is speaking to someone else now, a new proposal, a new initiative. But Daniel notices something immediately. He is not preparing. Not drafting counterpoints in his head. Not rehearsing clarifications. Not positioning his posture to signal competence. He is just listening. Across the table, a junior associate, Priya Shah, presents financial projections. Her voice wavers slightly. She rushes through her last slide. Margaret leans back. I'm not convinced this is sustainable. The words land heavier this time. Priya's shoulders stiffen, her mouth opens quickly, too quickly. Well, if you look at Q3 adjustments and the vendor renegotiation. Daniel recognizes the cadence instantly. Defense. He watches the subtle urgency in her hands as she gestures toward the screen, the need to restore narrative control before perception crystallizes. It's almost involuntary. He feels something unfamiliar then. Not superiority. Recognition. Because only a week ago that would have been him leaning forward, tightening the air around his image, negotiating alignment. But something has shifted. The hierarchy inside him has quietly reorganized. From a Jungian perspective, when the persona loosens its grip, the ego loses its obsession with external stabilization. Energy returns to the self, not in grand revelation but in subtle redistribution. Margaret interrupts Priya mid-sentence. That's not what I'm questioning, she says evenly. The room tightens. Daniel feels the old reflex stir again, the urge to intervene, to smooth, to clarify for someone else. To explain on her behalf. But he doesn't. He watches. Because he realizes something quietly radical. When you stop explaining yourself, you also stop explaining others. You allow tension to exist without managing it. Priya pauses, recalibrates, and tries again, slower this time. And this time Margaret listens. The moment passes. No explosion, no humiliation, just friction. Daniel writes a single word on his legal pad. Tolerance. Not tolerance of others. Tolerance of ambiguity. Of being temporarily misread. Of not controlling the room's emotional climate. The meeting continues. Daniel speaks only when necessary. His tone is measured, unforced. There's a noticeable difference, but it isn't volume. It's density. He is not speaking to protect identity. He is speaking because he has something to add. And strangely, the fewer words he uses, the more they seem to land. At 10:03 a.m., Margaret turns to him. Daniel, thoughts. The room angles toward him subtly. He feels the familiar pause, but it's cleaner now, less charged. I think Priya's right about Q3 adjustments, he says calmly, but we need a longer vendor commitment before it stabilizes. No elaboration. No performance. Margaret nods slowly. That's fair. And just like that, the conversation moves on. No one labels him passive. No one labels him anything. Because he is no longer feeding the projection cycle. Later that afternoon, Daniel walks past a glass partition and catches his reflection again. He looks the same as he did last week. But internally, the noise level has dropped. When you stop explaining yourself, you notice how much of your personality was constructed around anticipation. Anticipating misinterpretation. Anticipating criticism. Anticipating dismissal. Without that anticipation, there is space. And space changes posture. That evening, he declines an after-work drink invitation, not out of avoidance, but because he doesn't feel the need to reinforce alliances. He walks home alone. The air is colder now, October deepening into something sharper. As he crosses Amsterdam Avenue, he realizes something unsettling. There is less adrenaline in his day. Less urgency. Less emotional spike. It's quieter inside. And part of him misses the intensity. Because defending yourself gives you a kind of vitality, a narrative of resistance, a feeling of sharpness. Without it, life feels almost neutral. Is this maturity? Or withdrawal? He isn't sure yet. At home, he opens his laptop to review tomorrow's agenda. Emails scroll past, updates, deadlines. He notices something subtle in his responses. They are shorter. Cleaner. No preemptive clarifications. No defensive framing. Just clarity. He closes the laptop. The apartment is silent again. And that silence feels less like emptiness now, more like structure. Carl Jung believed that individuation involves reclaiming projections, recognizing that how others see you is often more about them than about you. Daniel begins to sense that he has been carrying not just his own identity, but everyone else's interpretation of it. And he has set some of it down. But setting something down creates a new question. If you are not managing perception, what are you building instead? He stands by the window once more. The city glows beneath him, windows stacked upon windows, each containing unseen lives, unseen misunderstandings, unseen negotiations of identity. He realizes something quietly sobering. Most people never stop explaining themselves. They refine it, they perfect it, they disguise it as confidence. But they never truly release it. And releasing it doesn't make you invisible. It makes you less predictable. Because when you no longer chase agreement, your energy becomes harder to categorize, harder to control, harder to provoke. Daniel feels that shift now, subtle but unmistakable. He doesn't need Margaret to see him differently. He doesn't need Ethan's validation. He doesn't even need the room's silence to mean approval. He simply needs to remain aligned with his own perception. And that realization carries weight. Because alignment without external confirmation requires something most people avoid: aloneness. He turns off the lamp. The room falls into shadow. And for the first time, the darkness doesn't feel like something waiting to define him. It feels like something that cannot. But this is only the beginning. Because once you stop explaining yourself, the world begins responding to you differently. November 3rd, 2018, 4:37 p.m. Executive floor. The air feels heavier today. There's a tension in the corridor, subtle but present. Conversations lower slightly as Daniel walks past, not dramatically, just enough to register. He notices it and keeps walking. Inside conference room B, the blinds are half drawn. The late afternoon light cuts across the table in long, angular shadows. Margaret sits at the head again, two senior directors beside her, Ethan across from Daniel this time. A different kind of meeting. Budget redistribution. The atmosphere is sharper, more territorial. Margaret speaks first. We'll need to consolidate oversight under one division. Her eyes shift toward Daniel, then briefly toward Ethan. There's history there, collaboration, overlap. I think it makes sense for Daniel to absorb operations, she continues. Ethan can shift to advisory. The word advisory lands like a quiet demotion. Ethan's jaw tightens almost imperceptibly. Daniel feels the energy change instantly. Old Daniel would have stepped in, softened the frame, clarified the intention, preserved the alliance. But he doesn't. He doesn't rush to reinterpret Margaret's phrasing. He doesn't explain what this shift really means. He waits. Ethan speaks instead. Advisory sounds peripheral. His tone is controlled, but there's steel beneath it. Margaret replies evenly, it's strategic. The silence that follows stretches. Daniel feels eyes flick toward him, waiting, expecting him to manage the relational temperature. He senses the reflex rise again. Fix it. Clarify it. Reduce the friction. But something steadier holds him in place. From a Jungian perspective, once the persona loosens, the individual becomes less invested in stabilizing collective projections. The social field adjusts, not always comfortably. Daniel finally speaks, but not to soothe. If operations consolidates under one division, accountability becomes clearer. Neutral, structural, not relational. Ethan looks at him. There's a flicker in his expression, surprise, maybe even betrayal. Because Daniel didn't cushion it. Didn't translate it into something gentler. He simply stated what he believed. And left it there. The meeting moves forward, logistics, timelines, reassignments. But something has shifted again. This time externally. At 6:12 p.m., Ethan catches up with him near the elevators. Did you know about that beforehand? He asks. The question is calm, too calm. Daniel shakes his head, no. A pause. You didn't seem surprised. Daniel considers the statement carefully. He wasn't surprised. Not because he expected it, but because he no longer feels the need to resist where he stands in the hierarchy. I think it makes sense structurally, Daniel says evenly. Ethan studies him for a moment. You've changed, he says quietly. Not accusing. Just observing. Daniel doesn't ask how. He doesn't defend the change. He lets the statement hang. Ethan exhales slowly. Well, congratulations. The elevator doors open. They step inside together, but the air feels different now, cooler, more defined. When you stop explaining yourself, some people experience it as distance. Because they were used to negotiating identity with you. Used to mutual reassurance. Used to shared narratives. And now, you are no longer participating in that exchange the same way. The elevator descends. Floor numbers blinking down. Ethan exits first, offers a short nod, no smile. The doors close. Daniel watches his reflection in the mirror again. You can almost feel the weight of it. There is power in not explaining yourself. But there is also loss. Loss of easy alliances. Loss of immediate validation. Loss of emotional choreography. He steps out into the lobby alone. Outside, the evening air is cold and clear. He walks without checking his phone. Because he already senses what's happening. When you no longer defend your image, people must relate to your substance. And substance can feel less accommodating. That night at home, Daniel sits in the dark without turning on the lamp. He replays Ethan's words softly in his mind. You've changed. He searches for regret. There is some. Not about the decision, but about the separation it quietly creates. Carl Jung believed that individuation is not a social process, it often isolates before it integrates. Daniel feels that isolation now. Not dramatic, not catastrophic. Just a widening gap between who he used to be in relation to others and who he is becoming internally. He stands and walks to the window. The city is restless below, horns, footsteps, fragments of conversation drifting upward. He realizes something slowly. When you stop explaining yourself, you stop giving people continuous access to your internal negotiations. And without that access, they must adjust. Some will lean closer. Others will step back. The shift is subtle, but irreversible. His phone lights up on the kitchen counter. A group message. Ethan and two others coordinating drinks without him. Daniel watches the screen glow in the dark. There's a flicker of something in his chest. Not anger. Not even hurt. Just recognition. This is the cost. He turns the phone face down. The room grows darker again. And in that darkness, he understands something deeper now. When you withdraw the need to explain yourself, you are no longer shaping how people stay. You are simply revealing who can remain without constant clarification. The silence feels heavier tonight. But also cleaner. Because beneath the loneliness, there is no internal argument. Only alignment. And alignment, once tasted, is difficult to surrender. He closes his eyes briefly. And for the first time, he wonders. If this continues, who will still be standing beside him? December 12, 2018, 7:26 a.m. Winter light, pale and metallic. The office is nearly empty when Daniel arrives. Security nods as he passes. The lobby smells faintly of pine from a discreet holiday arrangement near the reception desk. Outside, the city moves slowly beneath a thin layer of frost. He prefers arriving early now. Not to get ahead. To think. Inside his office, he sets his briefcase down and stands by the window. The glass is cold beneath his fingertips. Traffic crawls below in deliberate lines. There's been a pattern forming over the past few weeks. Meetings feel shorter. Conversations feel sharper. Some colleagues lean in closer when he speaks, others maintain a careful neutrality. Ethan is polite now, professional, distant. Margaret, on the other hand, has begun asking for Daniel's perspective more directly, not because he defends himself, but because he doesn't. When you stop explaining yourself, something subtle happens in the room. Your words carry less static. There's no hidden agenda to decode, no emotional negotiation embedded in tone. Just signal. At 8:02 a.m., Margaret steps into his office without knocking, something she never used to do. Do you have 5 minutes? He gestures to the chair across from him. She sits, no folder in hand. I've been noticing something, she says. He waits. You don't react the way you used to. It isn't criticism. It's curiosity. Daniel considers this. I'm listening more, he replies. Margaret studies him for a moment, then nods slightly. It's stabilizing. The word surprises him. Stabilizing. Not passive. Not disengaged. Stabilizing. She continues, when others escalate, you don't. It changes the temperature. There's a pause between them, but it's not tense. It's grounded. Carl Jung believed that as individuals integrate their shadow and loosen their persona, they become less reactive to projection, less compelled to defend, less seduced by emotional turbulence. The effect is subtle but powerful. Daniel realizes now that what felt like loss socially has created clarity structurally. Margaret stands. "Keep doing that," she says simply, before stepping back into the corridor. The door closes softly. Daniel remains seated. "Keep doing that." The irony is quiet. He isn't doing anything. He has simply stopped. Stopped explaining. Stopped smoothing. Stopped anticipating misinterpretation. And in the absence of that effort, something more coherent has emerged. Later that afternoon, during a quarterly review, a senior executive challenges a budget line item Daniel approved. "In hindsight, that allocation seems aggressive," the executive says. Several heads turn. Old reflex. You can almost feel it stir, the body preparing to justify, to fortify. Daniel inhales slowly. "It was aggressive," he agrees calmly, "and it delivered the result we needed. No defensiveness. No elaboration. Just ownership." The executive pauses. Then nods once. "Fair." The room moves on. But something crystallizes in that exchange. When you no longer scramble to defend your image, accountability becomes cleaner. You can admit risk without fearing collapse. Because your identity is no longer built on appearing flawless. It is built on alignment. After the meeting, Priya approaches him near the coffee station. "I've noticed something about you," she says carefully. He almost smiles. That rarely ends neutrally. She laughs softly. "You don't rush to fill silence anymore, it makes people think." He considers that. "I used to fill it," he asks. "All the time." She isn't criticizing. She's observing. "And now," he asks. "Now you let it sit, it makes your words heavier." He nods once. Silence, when not used defensively, becomes weight. That evening, Daniel walks home through colder air. December has sharpened the city's edges. Holiday lights glow in windows, but the streets feel narrower somehow. He notices something deeper now. The loneliness that surfaced weeks ago has softened. Not because he regained alliances, but because he stopped measuring connection through explanation. He meets fewer people after work. Speaks less in social settings. But when he does speak, he feels no residue afterward, no mental editing, no replay. The energy once spent on managing perception has consolidated inward. And that consolidation has created a steadiness he didn't anticipate. At home, he sits in the quiet again, but this time it feels inhabited. Not empty. Occupied. By himself. From a Jungian perspective, this is the beginning of true individuation, not dramatic transformation, but the subtle ability to remain internally coherent without external reinforcement. Daniel closes his eyes briefly. There's no adrenaline now. No narrative tension. Just stillness. And inside that stillness, he recognizes the final shift. When you stop explaining yourself, you don't become indifferent. You become selective. Selective with energy. Selective with speech. Selective with who has access to your internal world. The cost was distance. The reward is gravity. Weeks ago, he feared what this change would take from him. Now he understands what it has given him. A center that doesn't move when the room does. He stands and walks to the window one last time. Snow begins to fall lightly over the city, small, quiet fragments drifting downward without announcement. No defense. No performance. Just presence. And for the first time, Daniel understands something most people never test. When you stop explaining yourself, the world doesn't collapse. It recalibrates. And so do you.